Welcome to BlackUSA.news morning show. I'm your host, William Honable Jr. Join us as we explore the news and opinions that impact our community. We break down how the major stories have a very personal, local, and racial impact. No topic is off limits, but even if the conversation gets rough, we're always going to keep it real.
Greetings and salutations, all my friends out there in internet land. I am William Honable Jr., and I have the privilege of serving as the host of the Black USA News morning show. Good morning to you all. I want to give a big shout out from the beginning to you. I'm grateful for you being here. I'm grateful for you joining us on Black USA News to hear about what we got planned and all the stuff that's happening. So thank you very much. I'm not even going to sing to you. I appreciate you too much to sing to you. Want to just get into it. We're going to talk a little bit about this later, but here we go. Voting is incredibly important, and we'll talk a little bit more about why voting isn't enough and why we need to do some more. But one of the things that we're doing at Black USA News is that we're putting together our coverage of elected officials or candidates that have come to our various shows and have had conversations with us and wanted to share their platform or share their message and utilize our platform to do it. We've taken those interviews and we have put them together. Some of the ones they were with other people when they were interviewing or part of a larger show. And so what we've done is that we have really gone and taken that stuff and made it separate so that you can look and see what the candidates are saying directly. You don't have to just rely on the marketing that they send to your house and all the mail. It's crazy, all the mail. But make sure that you check out our continuing coverage of the election and I'm sorry, let me switch. The election and what we need to do to keep the crazy down, because actually that's all you could call it at this point. It's just a bunch of crazy for no reason. Let's talk about Breadcoin a little bit. I am so proud of our partnership with Breadcoin. Breadcoin is a nonprofit organization, a 501c3 that works with people who are food insecure, who may be homeless or otherwise hungry, works to get them the food that they need and to maintain their dignity. The way that it works is that Breadcoin takes donations and they take the body of those donations and they put value to these individual bread coins. So for example, right now, each bread coin is worth about $2.50. And so they take these bread coin and they work with nonprofit organizations that are in the community and that already work with people who have needs. And so by working with these organizations, these individuals who have food insecurity or who may have needs, they're able to get these coins and go into participating restaurants to purchase food. And for me, this is the best part of it. They get to do it without people knowing their situation. They get to maintain their dignity. If you've ever had to use public benefits or have heard stories about people who've had to go to get public benefits, Medicaid, Medicare, food stamps or housing. In many cases, the questions that they ask are so invasive. They are basically all in our business trying to find out what's going on with us. And it makes it, you have to expose yourself and then they judge you. Breadcoin removes that. You go in, you pay with your Breadcoin. Nobody knows why you're there or what have you. And you just get to eat and just be a real person while you eat. Let me tell you a little bit about my company.
Hi, my name is William Honable Jr., and I'm the host of the Black USA News morning show and the president of the Grinding Gang Incorporated. The Grinding Gang is an organization that helps small business owners in the nonprofit and for-profit communities figure out how to make sense of all the noise. There's a lot of information out there, and sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. We help you develop business plans. We help you figure out what to do with a lot of the information you receive. And we also help you figure out how to become more profitable. We also host a variety of workshops. You can check out our next workshop on grant writing right here.
All right. So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about us, a little bit about what we do. So let me tell you what we're going to do today. Today, we're going to kind of recap the news about what's been going on in the world because, it is crazy out here. So we have some, I don't know if it's good news or bad news. Property values in Baltimore are going up, and that's beneficial, except the challenge isn't that the property values are going up. It is the reason why property values are going up. Reporting has indicated that a lot of this is happening because of outside developers. Actually, the USA Today had a really good story where they talked about Coppin Heights Community Development Corporation. They had been attempting to purchase some of the vacant houses, very targeted. They had a community plan and things like that. And they were going to buy these houses from auction. Well, an out-of-town investor came in and jacked the price up, which has two consequences for the community development company. The first is that it taps their budget harder. So if they had, let's say, $100,000 to do bids today, and they estimated that each property was going to be about 25, because that's what the market was, and somebody came in at 40, well, they go from being able to get 4 houses to being able to get 2. And so that type of change is happening in the market space, and it's having a really substantial impact. The other part about having outside investors come into a community, especially one that has faced challenges to build it up, is that while you have this aesthetic change and it looks pretty and nice on the outside, what you also have is the displacement of the people who were there originally. So yes, it looks good, but the organization, the neighborhood, the community isn't going to be the same. Now, you can argue back and forth about whether it's a good thing that some of these communities change, but that we at least need to acknowledge that, because there are a lot of people who are holding on to their homes in the hopes that the government will come in or that someone will come in and change the environment because they don't have the resources. And so when you have somebody who comes into a community just because start kind of pushing things around just because they have resources, well, that creates a challenge for the people who normally live there. And they don't necessarily care or even understand the nature of the community, how things work in the community. And they're not trying to build relationships. They're coming in, building up some houses, renovating houses, and selling them and getting out. So in the movement from owning the property to selling the property, there's a detachment from the community. And that has significant implications, especially when we talk about gentrification. This is what gentrification looks like. And we're going to get a little bit more detail from that article in USA Today. Well, before we get into that, let me tell you about what I think is absolutely about to happen. I got to be honest, I'm amazed that it hasn't happened so far. But I am convinced that all of our markets are about to go tops. Well, they're going to continue to slide in places that we've not conceived of before. The housing market right now is artificially high because there's a lot of inventory that's being held up. There are people who would normally have moved by now in the last few years, especially since 2020 and COVID started. There are a lot of people who would have moved already. Whether it's for work or whether it's just because they had a new house or because they got married or some kind of life event, they would have already purchased a property or they would have sold the property that they had. Well, right now, because of the potential of the moratorium on mortgages and the backlog in the courts and the moratorium on evictions, there are a lot of people especially landlords, who are holding on to their property, but their property's value on paper is going up, but the cash they're getting in isn't. Because if your tenant can't pay and you haven't been able to get them out, let's say for a year, it's not like in most cases, the tenant isn't just holding the money. And so now when the eviction moratorium comes, they're just going to hit you with the cash and you'll be able to move on. That's not how it's going to work. What's probably going to happen is that the person that is your tenant, when it's time for them to move out, they're going to move out and you're not going to get your money. And that means that now that risk or that liability moves from the landlord and then to the mortgagor. And so it's going to have this cataclysmic effect backwards. Once the courts open back up and people can get to the courts and can start this eviction process. And a lot of landlords are really considering, they're trying to work with their tenants to make sure that things like this doesn't happen, even sometimes forgiving the rent or having them amortize or pay it over like the next year. It's like, okay, so let's do a 3-year lease now, and you pay me, 150% each, and then we call it square for the last year. People are getting very, very, very creative. And so that is something that is really important to take into consideration as we start. Good morning, Quandra. How you doing? That's really important to take into consideration as we are thinking through how we are looking at Black communities, especially, and how we navigate through some of those spaces. So let's talk about some of the things that they pointed out in the article. If you look, 5 years ago, I am doing pretty well. Quandra asked, how am I doing? I'm doing pretty well. We out here talking about real estate first thing in the morning. We're going to get into a lot of other stuff, but I wanted to start off on real estate because there are a lot of people who really do need to understand what's about to happen in the market. And so a vacant house, like a vacant, abandoned house, used to go at auction for about $17,000 on average. They've now gone up to $26,000. One of those shells where like there's no floors, no roof. Actually, I've seen one where there's a tree literally growing through the middle of the house. Those used to go for, I think they said about $2,500, $5,000, and now they're going for $10,000. So what that is an indication of is how the market is getting hotter, and people are looking. There's not enough inventory because, again, people are concerned about where they're going to get money from. Do I give up this house and can't afford the next house? So they're holding on to property without putting it on the market. So that means that people who are looking for it, they're willing to pay more because there's so few. And so that's going up. And so if you are holding if you're holding property, you may think that that's a good thing, but it also means that it is part of this larger shift in the way that the market works, the housing market in particular. What is happening to the housing market is the same thing that happens to most other markets. Even gambling, the corporations get involved. I knew about 7 years ago, maybe 7, 8 years ago, I was very confused as I was driving through Baltimore, and I knew something was changing because I saw a sign on a vacant property that said it was going to be sold by Sotheby's. And I was like, only one I know is Sotheby's is like the people that when you want to sell like a priceless painting or a Fabergé egg, you go to Sotheby's. And so I couldn't understand why a high post organization like Sotheby's was auctioning off a vacant property in Baltimore. But as I started studying the market more, what I realized is that a lot of these corporations are now buying single family homes because what they want to do is to corner the market on the resource. So what they saw is that when there were a lot of people who were making major money doing Airbnbs and things like that out of New York. And when those types of things fell down and people got kicked out of their apartments and out of their homes and people weren't able to find it because of the challenges in the economy, what happens is the corporations step in. As a distressed renter, and they see all the foreclosures as a distressed renter or a distressed mortgagee, you come in as a corporation, you're like, oh, I want to buy your property. I'm like, oh, thank God, here you go. I'm out. I don't have this debt anymore. But what happens is that they get your property, then they get another property, and they get another property, and they literally buy the block. And they do it one property at a time, and they'll end up with these portfolios. Now, let me ask you this. How often is it that large corporations come into communities and really help improve them consistently? I am concerned because this will end up being another developer explosion. I'm concerned that Baltimore is about to go through exactly what happened in Washington, D.C., where the people who have lived there for generations can no longer afford it. And, when the prices get high, we also know that what else happens is that people come in and they start stealing. They start convincing our older or our seniors in our communities that, oh, you need to sell this to me because somebody is going to take it. Actually, you know, I'm going to see if they're going to want to come on one time, but it actually happened to my cousins after my grandmother passed away. There was somebody who, all types of fraud happened, and their paperwork couldn't be found. It was really crazy. And they ended up taking her house out from under her. And the thing is, the reason that they were able to win is that they had the money. They would send, you know, these legal notices and things like that. And, you know, my cousin, she didn't have the resources. She fought hard, but she also isn't a lawyer. And so, you know, that happened. It's actually one of the things, and those types of protections and watching people be taken advantage of is one of the things that inspired me to go to law school. But so that will happen. That happens whenever the prices get high in any market. People who have bad intent come in. What it also means is that for organizations like the Coppin Heights CDC, it makes it more difficult for them to start planning to grow the community, because the difference between like a community development corporation that is anchored in the community and one of these you know, organizations from another state or another community that wants to come in is that the purchase and renovation of property with a community development corporation is more aligned with the direction and the beliefs and the needs of the community that exists there now and the way that they feel it's going to grow. Investors come to invest. I'm not suggesting that investors are coming to hurt the community, not suggesting that at all. I know some of them are, but most of them are not. Most of them really want to make money and to do it without doing harm and actually improve a community. But it's difficult to improve a community when you don't know that community. When you just kind of roll in and like, oh, let me tell you what's good for you because, and what I'll make a lot of money on. Well, that's not about them. The other challenge with a lot of these developers is that they don't come and talk to community development corporations or the community in general. They see these properties from a listing on a spreadsheet. They do the math on it. They talk to contractors and they look at resale value, and that's about it. They don't know who Mrs. Jones is. They don't know the history of the community. They don't know about, you know, why certain houses are special or what used to be and how, you know, you could have some of that again. The developers are there to make money, and not knocking them for that, but it creates a challenge when we're trying to build communities. So one of the things that it is also, I think, is important to know is like, what do the statistics look like in Maryland? So these are Maryland wide. Owner occupied housing takes about 67.1% of the housing stock. The average monthly cost for an owner with a mortgage is $2,038 a month, and the monthly for owners with non-mortgages is $633. The median rental income, or the median rent in Maryland, is $1,400. And that is median. That's taking the highest, well, the middle part from the lowest one to the highest one, because I know the actual average spans wildly. Hey, Michael, the average spans wildly. I know people who are paying $3,000-$4,000 in rent. I mean, I don't understand that, but that's what they're doing. And so these are just average numbers. So as we are looking at what happens next and where we need to invest our resources, real estate is a good place to invest your resources, but you also need to understand the risks that you are taking. There is a potential, and this is my prognostication. This is me telling the future what I think is going to happen. What I think is that once all of the rental issues resolve themselves, or the eviction moratoriums and the courts become, they have more room to process all of the, what do you call those things? Oh, all of the evictions. I think what you're going to see is that there are going to be a lot of properties that end up on the market faster. But what you also won't see is that there will be a lot of real estate agents and a lot of developers talking in real estate agents' ears. So pulling some of those properties before they even hit the market. So if, like, for example, if I know real estate agents that whenever they get a new listing, if there's an organization or business that they know buy houses, you know, pretty easily, if they have a deal that they want to do quickly, they call them. And so these large corporations will have the money to knock that out of the park. And that'll also mean that when the rest of the moratoriums and things stop, the inventory of housing is going to flood the market. So there'll be a lot of people who are going to get kicked out of the houses, and their houses will end up on the market, or they'll realize that they'll have to move, or that they can't sustain their current rate, their current employment, their current bills. And so they have to sell their house. So that'll mean that there'll be a lot of houses that hit the market. Well, once those houses hit the market, the price of all of the houses are going to go down. It's supply and demand. Right now we have a very artificially low supply. And so even if you have moderate demand, there's this gap. So people are willing to pay premiums on this gap. So if you have regular demand, but then you have this supply, well, that's a deficit. Now people want to discount from that to this. And so if you have property and you want to sell, you may consider doing that in the near future. And again, there's no way to tell when this is going to happen. I am surprised that it has not happened already. I got to be honest. So that's one of the things to think about. And when you're getting your financial situation together and really thinking about your investment in real estate or any of your investments, make sure that you reach out to a financial planner. And you can always hit up a former guest of ours, Mr. Sharif Small at SJS Financial. All right, so that's housing. Let's move on to another subject that has been pressing and has been in the news, monkeypox. So monkeypox, right? That's where we are now. We had the coronavirus. Now we have monkeypox. I mean, this is seeming real revelation-ish. So monkeypox. Monkeypox is a disease that is spread, it looks like, primarily skin to skin. Especially intimate skin. So sexual contact is one of the ways that monkeypox is spreading. You get kind of the normal viral thing, fevers and the like, but you also get these kind of boils on your skin. Monkeypox it's kind of like chickenpox in the way that you can conceive of it. Is just that the skin looks different. The way that the bumps show up is different. So that is something to watch out for. So again, please be very careful about your exposure, skin to skin contact. Please make sure that you keep washing your hands and washing your body. And I know some of you all like to lay in the wet spots, but it may be time that you all, when you finish, you just wash off immediately, because again, it's not like partners are going out and transmitting monkeypox on purpose, but this is another risk that we have. There are vaccines for monkeypox, but they're not available readily. They're not readily available. The federal government has the stockpile of vaccines. Well, they have a lot of the vaccines, and some jurisdictions have them. If you have an exposure DC, you can get it if you're part of certain populations, and that wasn't really clear to me when I looked. But there are some available in Washington, D.C. But if you're in Maryland, unless you have a reported exposure, you may not be eligible to get the vaccine. So that's something to take into consideration. Again, just be careful with our health. I remember a lot of us, coronavirus snuck up on. It was a couple cases here or there and blah, blah, blah. But in the midst of all this January 6th stuff, which we will talk about, don't get it twisted. In the midst of that, and Roe, which we'll talk about in just a second, in the midst of spaceships and gas prices and things like that, it is easy for us to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, well, you know what? I don't have the mental bandwidth to deal with monkeypox, so I'm just going to continue to behave as normal. You could do that, but you're putting yourself and everybody else at risk, and it's not worth it. I am COVID tired. I am pandemic, endemic. I am tired of demics, period. But I also not trying to rush into the grave. So I'm taking the precautions that I can. I'm wearing masks, and it's actually interesting now. We've gotten to the point where sometimes I'm the only one with a mask or that keeps it on. I've also learned how to hold my breath for pictures, but that's, and again, people may say I'm going too far. It's not that bad, but the risk is too high. I've lost too many people to the coronavirus. And I'm damn sure not trying to go through the same thing with monkeypox. So please keep yourself safe. If you have any lesions or raised bumps, if you start feeling any of the symptoms of a virus, just get yourself checked out. Wash your hands. Please, please wash your hands. And especially when you come out the bathroom, but not just when you come out the bathroom. Please wash your fruit and your cans and stuff like that, or at least wipe them down, because some of the people who didn't wash their hands in the bathroom, they're touching the fruit. All right, you didn't think about that, right? Yeah. So make sure that you wash your fruit off before you just go around putting that. You don't even know where nobody been. They just touching your fruit with you. You don't even know what. Makes me anyway. So public health. Sorry, I just gave myself this. Okay. Public health message. Make sure that you stay aware, keep yourself clean, keep your hygiene up. Stay away from people who may seem sick. Get yourself tested. If you're not feeling well, go to your doctor or at least call. And if you don't have health care, let's see what we can do to try to get you some. Go to, reach out to Medicaid. And that, well, we're going to do a whole show on healthcare later. But just wanted to give you all an update on the monkeypox. Please stay safe. All right, what's next? Oh, Roe versus Wade. Okay, Roe versus Wade. We are still feeling the effects of the Roe decision nationally. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that have come up since then, where people are pushing back, and also how some of the governments are pushing forward. You too, Quandra. So how some of the governments are moving forward. As you know, there were a lot of states who had anti-abortion laws, and what they did, and some of them, the provisions had either kicked in automatically, or there were some steps that they needed to take in order to put their bans in effect. And so what I want to talk about is, one of the questions that keeps coming up to me is like, how did this all happen? How can they go from it was law 50 years ago to they can just say it's not now? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court. I'm going to try not to bore you with it, but it's some things that you need to understand about the Supreme Court and how they make decisions. And I'll also talk about some of the challenges that are coming up to Roe versus Wade. It's called the Dobbs decision. So some of the challenges and some of the unintended consequences of the Dobbs decision. So the legal argument in Roe versus Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey, which further interpreted Roe, and that happened in the 90s. And so the idea was that the enumerated rights listed in the Bill of Rights all anchored around this concept of your right to privacy. So in the Bill of Rights, as they listed things out, it was, if you look at all this together, what they're trying to go for is this idea that you have a right to privacy from the government. You have a right to have your personal liberties not infringed on in the government. And they just didn't write down everything that could possibly happen, blah, blah, blah. So that's cool that they did that. And so that's where it came from. And some of the concepts around it are also the same. This underlying legal principle is also the same legal principle that prevents states from banning contraception or to putting undue hardships on contraception. It is the same one that allows states to not infringe on same-sex marriage. It is the same one that allows the act of sodomy, because in some places sodomy is still illegal. And for those of you all who don't know what sodomy is, it's considered anal sex is sodomy. And there are some, like I think in Maryland, I don't know if they've changed the law, but I know for a long time, because it pissed me off, especially once I got out of law school, I realized oral sex was illegal in Maryland for a long time. And actually oral and anal sex, they called them perverted practices. And so if you were found guilty of oral sex, you could actually go to jail. Yes, that was a whole law. Now, when I talked to some prosecutors, I didn't talk to the prosecutors, I talked to the defense attorneys about it. What they said is that they have seen prosecutors use that, but it's normally if it is a prostitution case and they can't prove the transaction or the exchange of goods, then they'll use, oh, there was oral sex or anal sex happened, so it is a perverted practice, so that is the crime. So trying to use it to leverage into other crimes or to add additional crimes to a person's charges. So that's that right to privacy protected those things. So one of the things that people are talking about in the Roe decision is not just about the right to an abortion, but also a right to just do you without government interference. What this means is that, while they're saying that the federal government doesn't have the right, they leave it back to the states. But now you have the states micromanaging what you put in, what you can do with your body and doing it in a way that only impacts women, people who are capable of giving birth. So one of the things to understand and is the different types of law. So you have statutes, like the Constitution in America is the big cheese. Nothing can violate the Constitution. But under the Constitution, you have statutes. Statutes are laws that have been authorized by Congress and signed by the president, have passed through that official process, and now they are the law of the land. The law has to go through that process, and that is what happens. And that is what you have to live with. So like laws about health department regulations, or laws about what bank fraud is. Those laws got voted on by the legislature and signed off by the executive, and now are part of our legal system. And so those can only be struck down by a court if the court says that they're inconsistent with the Constitution. So you have the Constitution, which is the big cheese. There's nothing that is inconsistent with the Constitution. The Constitution runs all law in the United States. Then you have statutes or laws, the general concept of laws. Those are the ones that the legislature does, the president signs, or the governor signs, and those become laws. Underneath those are regulations. And so regulations are when these administrative departments really put out rules on how you actually do it. So the General Assembly or the legislature and the executive branch can say, all right, nobody can do bank fraud. Nobody can do bank fraud, and this is what bank fraud is. Okay, and then a department, and it would all say something like, and the Department of Commerce will have the authority to promulgate regulations to identify bank fraud. So what ends up happening is that then the Department of Commerce puts out regulations. Now the regulations have the power of law once they go through the process. They have the power of law because they are just enabling the statute. So these regulations make it so that you can actually do the statute. So you can say how bank fraud looks, what documents can be used to show bank fraud and things like that. So that's what the regulations do. And then the rest of it is like policy guidance and stuff like that. Well, those are how the laws we normally think of get made. Now, there's a whole other set of law called common law. And what that means is basically laws that the judges from the bench, if there's no official statute or act or codified law or regulation on the topic, the judges can say, well, now that you've brought this to us, we don't agree, this, that, or the third. Here's how we see it. And so their job is to interpret the law. So they look at the acts and they look at all of the law around, and they look at the facts and they determine, do the facts that were presented violate a law? And if they do, they said, okay, based on that, this is the punishment. Now, here's the thing. The judiciary, the judges, they have no army, they have no police force. I mean, they have like security force, but they don't have a police force. All they have is pens and paper. So they send these orders, and then it goes back on to the executive branch to enforce it. Well, that can get awkward. And actually, there have been times in history where the Supreme Court has done things that presidents didn't like, and the president was like, who gonna make me? Because I got the armies, and it became, kind of a standoff, and there was some negotiating done, and that resolved. But that is a very real thing about the courts. They don't have any way to enforce it. So they normally stand on their reputation. Like the belief of honor and the belief of the impartiality of justice, which, by the way, is bullshit. Justice is not impartial. We are clearly witnessing the difference between what happens when people who are poor or people who are of color or don't have power. We get to see the differences in the justice system. So the way that they decide the case, so the first thing that they do, they have unlimited discretion for topics. So they can take cases that have come through the process, but it's important to know, like, the difference between the courts and kind of the legislature or the other two branches of government. The courts have to wait for somebody to bring them something. So if a judge is driving by and sees like a heinous case of injustice, the judge can't do anything, because the way that they keep the judiciary in its place, or it's separating its power, is that it can only deal with stuff that other people brought. And then on top of it, it is so mired in procedure, it is ridiculous. So it becomes quite difficult for a lot of people to navigate through. And so, but even these courts, many of them have limited jurisdictions. So there's certain cases they can take, certain topics they can, certain topics they can't. But the Supreme Court can take all of the topics. So they have a lot of authority when it comes to things like what cases they take and how all of that works. So one of the first stages is even deciding what case to take. So they have to, when they hear when a case gets a petition, it's called a petition to the Supreme Court. Before we get to the petition, let's talk about everything that has to go before you get to the petition. So at first, there has to be an incident. So let's say it's a criminal case. So you get arrested and you believe that there is a violation of your rights. You bring that up at the trial judge. There are certain ways that you have to do it to preserve your rights. And so you bring it up. And let's say the trial judge says, yeah, I agree with you. That shouldn't have happened. And you go, what? And so then let's say the trial judge doesn't agree with you. And you go like, dang. And so then you go to the Court of Appeals and you present your argument. And you go through that process, and the Court of Appeals goes, nah, yeah, okay, I agree. You're like, yay, they agree. But then the defense attorney, the prosecutor, they go like, well, no, we're appealing it, and they appeal it to the Supreme Court. Now, each one of those steps is normal. It can take years in the making. So to get a court date, criminal court date, in many cases, it's a good a year and a half to get through a process, especially with a case with some serious substantive issues, because there are a lot of rules to protect fairness. So if I say something, then you have 30 days to respond. Then you say something back to me. Now I have another 10 days to respond. Then we go to the judge. The judge pulls all the responses. We go through, and then we go through, before that, we go through the discovery. We do scheduling. There are all of these rules in place to give everybody an opportunity to prepare. So that's why a lot of these cases that come before the Supreme Court, they're like, yo, what happened? We heard this, this happened, 5 years ago. Like cases where you have a high school student arguing about something, they come as a college grad to the hearing, because it takes that long. So that's one of the important things to recognize. So when it finally does get to the Supreme Court, the documents come in, they get reviewed by the justices, and 4 justices have to vote in order to get a case brought before the Supreme Court. Now, once you get a case brought before the Supreme Court, there are a couple of, it's important to understand that this creates a lot of politics in it. And so the Supreme Court, it's basically like you got 9 people and you got to get their votes going the way that you want. And while a lot of times things go on party lines nowadays, before it was a lot of collegial, they were friendly. They were friendly with each other. And so that friendliness got people to, push votes this way and that way. So so that's the first step. They work together to decide what cases are going to come. And sometimes they take cases like, now that they have Amy Coney Barrett, Brett Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, they had 3 extra votes. So now those 3, all they need is one more person, and they can bring whatever court case they want to the Supreme Court. You see what I'm saying? So they now, this Trump block has an opportunity to bring whatever, all they need is one more vote, and they can bring whatever cases they want to the Supreme Court. Now, once they get there, things get a little different. So after oral arguments are presented, then they go back into a chamber, just the justices, and they do an initial vote. So it's like, all right, we heard what they said. Who's down to and the initial vote is just on the rules from the lower court. So when it comes to the Supreme Court, either they're going to agree with the lower court, they're going to disagree with the lower court. And if they disagree, there are a couple things that they can do. So then they take the first vote after they hear oral arguments, and they said, all right, do y'all agree or do y'all disagree? And so they see the vote, and whoever comes out in the majority, then they get to the next step is once you vote, you get segregated into, we agree on this, we agree on that. And whichever group is in the majority, if the chief judge is in the group in the majority, he gets to determine who writes the opinion for the court. If you are not if the chief judge isn't in the majority, then it goes to the highest ranking Supreme Court judge. Now, all of this is important, and I'm gonna tell you why in a little bit, but we're almost done. And so when you write the opinion, that's not it. That's not just it. So what happens is that you write a draft, share it with everybody else. They say, I like this, I don't like this. And what can happen along the way is that in reading the main draft and then reading people's responses back and forth, because they send memos about all this stuff, like in reading all that, you start realizing like, oh, well, maybe I was wrong on that. Oh, maybe I agree for this reason. Oh, I didn't know you were going to go down that road. Like they start reading this, and what can happen is that the votes can shift. So you could be in 5-4, and then you write something that one of the people don't agree with, and then it moves from being an opinion of the court where at least 5 people vote like this is what we all say together, to maybe a concurrence or a dissent, or it could even shift the majority. So why is all this important? All this is important, and it pertains to Roe, because that's all this was voting. This wasn't a change in law. This wasn't a set of new facts that were extraordinary that led to a new conclusion. This was just, I have more votes. That's the politics that the Supreme Court has always tried to rise above. But now they're caught square in it, and they don't seem to care. And I got to give, that goes with, I think, having a lot of these Trump appointed justices, because they were, everybody said, well, the law professors, the bar associations, they all said that they weren't qualified to be Supreme Court justices. But what they were is loyal. What they were ideologues, and we have seen that. That is why we talk about voting. That is why we talk about getting people engaged. And let me say this. It was disturbing for me to watch President Biden say that the point that the justices made about women having the ability at the ballot box to change this, I thought was exceptionally insensitive, because this is, again, victim blaming. Like, white men are doing this. White men are pushing a lot of this narrative. They are the ones who are in control of making these decisions in most of these areas. And now we're putting it back on women to make this right. It is unfortunate, and it was tone deaf. And I think that the issue is that the White House needs to do more. And President Biden, just in general, side note, is such the grandpa who wants peace. And that is awesome, except when you got the bad kid there. You can't have peace with him. He's going to knock down all the stuff, and just telling him time out, that's not going to work. More aggressive steps need to be taken, and there needs to be accountability. The privilege of running for office needs to be stripped from many of these people for what they have done. So, but that's separate. So we need to make sure, because these same things are going to be happening at the local level. So the responsibility, because of the corruption in the process, the responsibility has been forced back on us. And it's not just us to vote, because that's what we've been doing, and it does not work out that well. Now, voting is important, but it's the first step. You have to vote, you have to volunteer, you have to contribute. We're going to talk a little bit about that if we have enough time, because I didn't realize this is going to go so long. But prochoiceamerica.org, that's a organization. Okay, so Quandra asked, so what can we as constituents do? I'm going to talk about that in just a second. One of the things is to make sure that we stay educated, that we know what's going on. So visit websites like prochoiceamerica.org. They have a lot of resources, not just to talk about the policy level and the politics of it, but also to kind of dig in and talk about in your local area, what resources are available for you if you need abortion services, or if you need any other type of medical support, or if you want to advocate, want to get involved, want to donate. ProChoiceAmerica.org is a wonderful organization to do that in. You can also hit up the ACLU.org. They have a pledge that you can take. They want you to share your story. One of the more interesting pieces that I have heard is the story of women who've had abortions and how they talk about the challenge it was not just to access the services, but the decision, and how, you know, in some cases they regret it, in some cases they didn't. But in the stories that I've heard, they appreciate having the choice. That is exceptionally important as well. So share your stories. Make this something that we talk about. And for elected officials who don't want to support a woman's right to choose, vote them out. Vote them out. That has to be done because they are holding up our ability to get to be free. Damn it. Just to be free. Why are you so engaged in the business? So one of the other things that I appreciate, because it is one of the tactics that the conservatives use, is not frivolous lawsuits, but lawsuits that challenge the stupidity of the system. So there's a young lady who is now challenging a ticket she got in a high occupancy vehicle lane because she's pregnant. Says, according to Roe versus Wade, this is a person in my belly, so I can ride in the HOV lanes. And again, is that going to change the world? No, but it causes people to stop and think. There is actually in Florida, there is an organization, a temple, a Jewish synagogue. A Jewish synagogue. They are suing Florida because, as part of the Jewish faith, apparently, if a woman's life would be otherwise harmed, as an article of faith, she can receive abortion services. So they are telling a very, very small window lawsuit to push back on Florida's law banning abortion, saying that it's a violation of faith. I think the way they're doing it is that this portion says that if the health of the mother is required, that's one of the options. But the congregation is like, yo, we don't need that in our faith. And so you're telling us we can't practice our faith. There have also been some horrible circumstances that have arisen because of the change in Roe. You've had a 10-year-old in Ohio who was raped by a family member and who was impregnated by a family member, who had to be taken to Indiana to go get the procedure done. She couldn't get it done in Ohio, and she's lucky because in another year you may not even be able to get it done in Indiana. So this is a great question. So why do most conservatives always think that it's only single women having abortions and not married couples who abort children because they cannot afford another child? That's because to say that suggests that there's a problem with their family values narrative. Because you're right, a lot of people who do get abortions are married couples or people who are in committed relationships and already have children. So they don't want to say that because they can't defend that part. If they try to make it seem like it's these floozies who are out there just spreading their legs for everybody, it reinforces that purity narrative that conservatives love. Like everybody has to be driven pure as the driven snow, except us when we're at home. We can do whatever we want there. And so it's this type, this hypocrisy and using this idea, kind of like when they used to use the idea of the welfare queen to talk about the problems with public assistance. Well, when you look at the data, there are more white families in suburban and rural areas on social services in the aggregate than you have in urban areas of people of color. And so the narrative gets them to be able to get their message out the way they want and talk to their people. Because let's be clear, we are at a place where facts be damned. Nobody cares about the reality of. They don't care about what they said the last time. Hell, we got one of the justices because in 2015, Mitch McConnell, 2016, Mitch McConnell said that the voters should decide who, since there was an election within 11 months, the voters should decide who the next president is and thereby the next Supreme Court justice. That happened at the end of President Obama's term. At the end of President Trump's term, the election had already started when they nominated and appointed Amy Coney Barrett, Justice Coney Barrett. Like, that already happened. So the inconsistency, the issue is that there is no accountability. So long as they keep winning, there are people like, okay, and it doesn't matter what they went on. So, I mean, think about how long it's Own the Libs, our party, and like they worship their party as like rock stars and gods. And it's like, you realize that those are just folk, though, right? No, they don't. For them, this is a way of life, and they are so focused on just those parts that that part of life that they can do things that don't make sense. Like one of the things I thought was really impressive about the way that the Republican Party operated back when Newt Gingrich was in control is that they got you focused on your one issue. It's like, hey, you are anti-abortion. Come on, let's focus over here on anti-abortion. That's all you work on. We have enough stuff to do. We have rallies. We have this and that. So you're anti-abortion, Republican, anti-abortion. But then you also may be a queer person and looking at the homophobic rhetoric. Oh no, don't look at that. Come on, anti-abortion. Like they're doing their thing, and that probably won't go anywhere anyway. But you want to stay focused on your thing, and people got in. And that's how I think that's how one of the ways that you end up with a lot of this cultish type behavior, because people are so focused in on Second Amendment. They don't talk, then they just spew all of the other things that they've heard. Even if they are deeply, most of them can't repeat to you what the Second Amendment is, and it defines their life, but they don't know what it is. But they will repeat what they heard about abortion. It's just wrong. Jesus and God doesn't want it, blah, 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 except that that's absolutely not true. The founding fathers didn't want it. Absolutely not true. I think it was Ben Franklin wrote a book on how to do it safely at home. I'm gonna look that up. I'm gonna put that on the show notes. Ben Franklin's abortion book, because I recently heard that during these conversations. I haven't verified that, but I'm gonna go look it up. So all that to say, they are making these things up just so that they can keep winning, because it's all about the win. It's not about the help. It's about the win. So what you can do is. Quandra, you know what? I'm gonna have to come on your show again. We want to talk about this whole the term limits, and actually not just term limits, but not a full vow of poverty. But I think that if you shouldn't be able to invest in the stock market that you regulate. Like, I think that if you're going to be a public servant, recognize that there's some public sacrifices necessary. But we gonna talk about that later. One of the things that, to your point, Quandra, about the people who are running, one of the ways that we can give them more term limits is have more people running. And so we need to get out. And if you feel something about a certain way about something, just run for office. I mean, we may talk about that tomorrow. Some of these lunatics running out of Arizona and Wyoming. We could talk about that maybe tomorrow. But run for office. Work for the government. Like, one of the things that we're seeing in the January 6th, and we're not going to have time to talk about that today, so we're going to take care of that tomorrow. One of the things that we find in the January 6th, it is the only reason that democracy survived was that people just did their jobs. They weren't heroes, don't get it twisted, because they watched a lot of the stuff happen. I talk about how they didn't go to the DOJ. Hell, the DOJ was in some of the meetings. And so working for the government, when we have people with integrity going to jury duty, stepping up and serving, and recognize that it is not sexy. It is not fun. Right now, there's a shortage of election judges, and guess who's going to fill those posts? The same ones who were threatening them before. Because that's how this works. They want people who don't have integrity to be there. So when they're ready to steal, they may not be ready yet, but I need you in place so when I am. And so making sure that you work for, if you can, work for government. Host a fundraiser for candidates or host a fundraiser for issues. Go and testify. Testifying is public. You can write a letter and have your letter read as part of the record. You can go and talk to them. You can go and and don't get it twisted. It's not going to be, Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Sometimes they won't pay attention to you. That's part of the process, but you get there and you make them pay attention. You call them out, you hold them accountable. You figure out what's best for you because it's your voice. not just your vote. It's your voice. Again, sending letters to issues and challenge them. I'm not talking about going out here and threatening anybody, anything like that, but challenge is like, hey, you said this. Now you're doing this. Help me understand how those things work together. And if they don't, help me understand how you're going to fix it. And if you're not, thank you for that. I'm going to find a new employee, because that's who they are. They are employees. We hire them to work for us. All right. Spend money with businesses and organizations that support the candidates or issues that you support. A lot of times we don't even take into consideration, like I will not shop at Hobby Lobby. One, because I don't do crafts like that, and it's not that big a deal to me, but also because of some of their stances on and the way they treat their employers. It is horrible and it's exploitive. And I think part of the problem with commerce in general. So I choose not to spend money with them. I try to spend money in places that actually impact the community and have that type of local feel and local impact. And so you can do the same thing. And now, no matter what else happens, they absolutely understand about money. Volunteer to do things like door knocking. If you can't door knock, join a phone bank. Say, hey, give me a script and let me call some people and let me tell them why I support you. Because a lot of we get mad at these candidates who don't show up except during election time. But what have we done between elections? I know candidates who have been on the forefront of issues, have testified on damn near every bill, have done all of this stuff. And then when they come to run, it's like, well, I've never heard of you before. You wasn't where I was at. I was out doing the work. You were at home waiting for me to bring it back. So if you have an opportunity, there's something you really believe in. If you have enough to talk about it on social media, and by the way, just tweeting is not sufficient. That is helpful. That is educating and informing people. But if that is the extent of it, well, then recognize that you're going to get out what you put in, if you're lucky. So make sure that you find out about what's going on and talk about these things to your friends and family. If you have had, or if you have had an abortion, if you have been with someone who has, if you've gone through that experience, and regardless of what side you are on it, because I don't want you to think like, hey, I only want to hear from people that agree with me. Because if there's a problem with the policy, then we need to address the problem. We need to make sure that this is, and again, trying to strike the balance between doing what's right and not infringing on people's liberties. And it's always a balancing test. And what's happening is that the conservatives have thrown this out of balance because they have worked harder outright, and they have all been focused on winning. And that's part of the challenge with them now. That's how Donald Trump got in charge, because he promised winning. Oh, the Contract for America with Newt Gingrich, that started off this whole winning, and then it evolved into the Tea Party and now to the MAGA movement. This was the natural evolution of things. When your party is built on hate, when your party is built on anti-Semitism, when it's built on misogyny, when it's built on alienation and xenophobia, this is the natural conclusion. When you focus exclusively on winning, cheating becomes a requirement, because the reality is that no one wins all the time. You just don't. There's a period of time where you stop winning. But people who are just focused on winning, they can't conceive of that. And what you end up with is a violent mob on the Capitol trying to hang the vice president sent by the president. So that's the teaser for tomorrow, because tomorrow we're going to get into the January 6th, and we're also going to talk, what else are we going to talk about tomorrow? Well, we're definitely going to talk about January 6th, because yesterday, baby, that hearing yesterday was bananas. And the way, you know what, it's going to be great. Tomorrow is going to be phenomenal. And regardless of where we're talking about January 6th, Roe versus Wade, or any of the great things that happen in the community, we'll be black then.